My husband slammed his hand on the marble countertop, his eyes flashing with an entitlement that turned my blood cold. "Hand my dad the keys, Emma. It's his house now. Stop being selfish and do what you're told." His father stood right behind him. A smug, greedy grin spread across his face as he'd already begun deciding which rooms belonged to his extended family. They thought they'd backed me into a corner. They thought a quiet woman would simply crumble under pressure. But they'd completely forgotten who actually signed the deed to this place. I took a deep breath, looked my father-in-law dead in the eye, and smiled. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I calmly spoke a single sentence. The moment the words left my mouth, my father-in-law's smug smile vanished, and his face turned entirely pale. "Stay with my story until the end to find out what happened, and tell me the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. My name is Emma Walker. I'm 40 years old, and if the last 2 decades of my life have taught me anything, it's that peace is something you earn through blood, sweat, and absolute silence. For 20 years, I poured every ounce of my energy into building a career, working late nights, and saving every penny I could. I believed I was building a future with a partner who valued that dedication. When I married Julian, he seemed like a man who admired my drive. He was gentle, soft-spoken, and always echoed my dream of one day owning a peaceful sanctuary, a place we could truly call our own. But as the years crept by, the mask began to slip. Julian's support curdled into a quiet, simmering entitlement, heavily fueled by his overbearing father, Arthur. To Julian, my hard work wasn't a shared triumph. It was a resource for his family to manage. The breaking point came when my parents passed away, leaving me a generous inheritance. Combined with 20 years of savings, I finally bought our dream home outright. It was meant to be my ultimate sanctuary, a testament to survival and love. Instead, the moment the papers were finalized, Julian didn't see my achievement. He saw an asset, a grand stage to elevate his family's social standing and feed his father's relentless greed. The paint was barely dry on the living room walls when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, my father-in-law, Arthur, stood on the porch with a smug grin that instantly turned my stomach. He hadn't been invited, yet he crossed the threshold before I could even greet him, shrugging off his coat as though he owned the place. He claimed it was just a casual housewarming visit, a sudden burst of paternal pride. But the moment his boots hit my hardwood floors, the whole atmosphere shifted. Arthur didn't move through the house like a guest. He moved through it like a health inspector, running his fingers along the door frames and critiquing the architecture. "The layout's a bit tight, Emma," he remarked, his voice dripping with passive-aggressive condescension as he eyed the spacious living room. "But I suppose for someone of your background, this feels like a palace. You got lucky." Julian immediately scrambled to his father's side, his demeanor shifting into something painfully subservient. He nodded eagerly at every critique Arthur made, chasing the old man's approval like a loyal lieutenant desperate for a promotion. As I stood back and watched them, I noticed a tense, silent exchange passing between my husband and his father. It was a series of knowing nods and subtle shifts in posture, a secret language perfected over decades. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. This was no surprise visit. A hidden agenda was already in motion, and they believed I was completely blind to it. Arthur wasted no time. He marched up the stairs, his heavy footsteps echoing through the hallway as he began opening doors. I followed close behind, my hands tightening into fists as I watched him aggressively assign specific bedrooms to Julian's siblings and extended cousins. "Michael can take the master suite on the east wing," Arthur announced loudly, ignoring my presence entirely, as if I were a ghost in my own home. "And this smaller room will suit your aunt when she visits from Chicago." Julian stood right behind him, backing his father up with a terrifying lack of shame. "Of course, Dad. Family sticks together. Emma has plenty of space to share. She won't mind making a few sacrifices for the sake of the bloodline." The confrontation reached its peak when we finally walked back down into the kitchen. The tension in the room was suffocating, a high-stakes moment where the emotional weight of my 20 years of hard work collided head-on with their pure, unchecked greed. Standing there by the marble countertop, Julian looked at me with a cold, commanding authority I had never seen before. The husband I thought I knew had vanished completely, replaced by an entitled stranger convinced he held the upper hand. He stretched his palm toward me, his voice dropping into a demanding, unyielding tone. "Hand my dad the keys, Emma," he barked, overstepping every legal boundary and assuming total ownership of my sanctuary. They truly believed I was cornered, trapped by my own politeness. But they had no idea their elaborate game was about to collapse. I stood perfectly still in the center of the kitchen, holding absolute composure. I refused to give them the desperate emotional reaction they were clearly hoping for. Julian's hand stayed extended, and Arthur's smug smile widened, both of them fully expecting me to burst into tears or launch into an empty argument. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath, looked my father-in-law dead in his greedy eyes, and let a calm smile spread across my face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight. I simply delivered the one crushing sentence that legally disarmed them both. "I'm glad you love the layout, Arthur." But the irrevocable trust my parents established mandates that if Julian's family ever attempts to reside here, the property immediately transfers to a private estate, and you'll both be sued for trespassing. The words cut through the room like a blade. The moment the sentence left my mouth, Arthur's smug, triumphant smile vanished completely, and the color drained from his face until he turned entirely pale. He staggered back slightly against the counter, his mouth opening and closing. As the harsh, terrifying reality of their powerless position sank in violently, Julian's extended hand fell to his side, his eyes wide with shock, as he realized their months of careful planning had just slammed into a concrete wall. The stunned silence that followed in the kitchen was deafening, as the entire balance of power shifted completely into my hands. The silence in the kitchen didn't last long, but the moment they left my house that afternoon, everything changed. I knew one sentence wouldn't stop men driven by desperate greed, so I acted immediately. That very night, while Julian slept, I sat in the glow of my laptop screen and began digging through his personal financial documents, cloud backups, and digital history. What I uncovered was a calculated nightmare that turned my blood cold. Julian and his father hadn't just gotten greedy on a whim. They'd been actively plotting a hostile takeover of my life for months. Deep within a hidden digital folder, I found a series of detailed email exchanges between Julian, Arthur, and a shady real estate attorney. They were planning to use high-pressure tactics to push me into signing what I thought would be standard, joint occupancy paperwork. In reality, the documents were structured to quietly transfer the deed to a shell entity fully controlled by Arthur. The reason behind their desperation was laid bare in black and white. Arthur had racked up massive, crushing debts from failed commercial ventures, and his creditors were closing in. They saw my hard work and my parents' inheritance as their personal get-out-of-jail-free card. The most devastating part was reading Julian's own words to his father, badly underestimating my intelligence, insisting I was too submissive to ever read the fine print. That absolute betrayal changed everything. I shifted instantly from a hurting wife to a woman executing absolute justice. I didn't waste a single second mourning the ashes of my marriage. The very next morning, I took the incriminating emails and financial records straight to a high-profile asset protection attorney. Armed with irrefutable proof of their attempted fraud, my legal counsel moved with terrifying efficiency. We quietly executed the final restrictive clauses of the property trust, locking down every asset. 2 days later, while Julian sat on the sofa watching television, a process server knocked on the door. Julian was formally served with divorce papers, a strict restraining order, and an immediate eviction notice giving him exactly 2 hours to pack his things and leave my property for good. Arthur received his own legal package at the exact same moment. Our legal team forwarded evidence of his fraudulent schemes to his primary creditors and corporate regulators, facing absolute legal ruin, cut off entirely from the wealth they'd tried to steal. Their house of cards collapsed spectacularly. Arthur's remaining assets were seized by the bank, forcing him into a humiliating public bankruptcy. Julian, stripped of the lifestyle he'd tried to weaponize against me, quickly realized he'd lost everything. Without my income or his father's backing, he was forced into a tiny, cramped apartment, entirely broke, facing the crushing consequences of his own entitlement. They wanted to destroy my peace, but in the end, their own unchecked greed ensured they destroyed themselves. 3 months have passed since the dust settled, and my home has finally become the quiet sanctuary I always dreamed it would be. The air feels lighter now, free from the toxic manipulation and heavy entitlement that used to fill every room. I spend my mornings at the kitchen counter drinking coffee in absolute peace, knowing every square inch of this property belongs to me and me alone. This experience forced me into a massive journey of self-discovery, stepping out from the shadow of a dishonest marriage and fully reclaiming my independence. But I knew I couldn't just sit back and enjoy my wealth. I wanted my survival to serve a greater purpose. So using part of my parents' inheritance, I officially established a foundation dedicated to helping other women recognize, fight, and protect themselves from severe financial abuse and familial manipulation. It's empowering work, satisfying in a way that trying to please an ungrateful family never could be. I answer to no one but myself now, so I'm genuinely curious about all of you who followed this story to the end. What would you have done standing in my kitchen, facing that level of greed? Have you ever had to protect yourself from people who were supposed to love you? Let me know in the comments. Meanwhile, I'm leaving 2 more incredible stories on the final screen, both absolute channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching.